Hey there, it's Courtney with an IE, and welcome to This Is Fine, Right? I'm an embodiment coach and creator of the Body Truth Method. In this podcast, we talk about hormones, gut issues, motherhood, identity, glow-ups, breakdown, and all the messy in between. Because honestly, the glow-up doesn't come from reinventing yourself. It comes from learning how to listen, interpret, and integrate what your body is telling you. And I'm here to walk you through all of it. Okay, so before we get into this episode, I want to share why I'm talking about this. This isn't just a story about my son's surgery. It's a story about learning how to listen when something feels off, even when you don't have all the proof yet. Becoming a mother amplified something I had already learned through my health journey. When you learn how to listen to yourself, your body, your intuition, your signals, you also learn how to listen more deeply to the people you love. So this episode is for any parent who felt that quiet knowing and questioned whether they were overreacting or making too much of it. The work I do is about developing that ability to listen, interpret, and respond with clarity, whether it's your own body or your child, so you're not operating from fear, but from trust. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode. It's been a minute since I've done a podcast because this is hard. I thought I had all my tech stuff figured out, and then I dropped my microphone, and I had to get a new one. And so here we are in my new setup. If you are people that are watching this, I am in my legit living room. So welcome to my home. It doesn't get much more vulnerable and personal than this. Okay, so today's subject, it's actually really close to my heart. I would say that this episode is going to be for people that are parents and maybe have had questions here and there about their child's speech or hearing or speaking. I said speaking. I said speech. Okay. Or eating, mouth breathing, stuff like that. So let's get into it. Okay. The reason I brought up this topic is because this whole podcast is about asking yourself, this is fine, right? And I've done a lot of advocating for myself, especially in the health and wellness department. And because of that, I also have to advocate for my son because he can't advocate for himself. So this goes all the way back to when he was 2 years old. Maybe even before that. Okay, so before that, my son was getting ear infections. And I didn't love it because basically the only way I could get rid of it was antibiotics. So I think by the time my son was 2, he had probably had 2 ear infections. Then we get to what people call the terrible 2s, which I can understand how they would be terrible, but I think it's more terrible for the child because I mean, you can imagine how frustrated you are if you're 2 years old and you're trying to communicate what it is that you're feeling or what it is that you want or you need and you don't have the words. Like, that would suck. So I could understand his frustrations. And even though he was only 2 years old, my son was pretty bright. And every time I was trying to understand what it is that he wanted and needed, he would have a breakdown. Not necessarily like a physical, huge tantrum, going crazy in public. Not necessarily like that. But it was just like crying. And I could tell in the crying it was frustrating for him. So I thought, you know what? Maybe he needs a little bit of like a speech therapy. So at the time, I had insurance with Kaiser. This is my experience with Kaiser. Okay. So If you have them and you love them, good for you. Okay. Because we had Kaiser, I went to their ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor. And I was letting them know that I feel like he's having trouble with speaking. And I don't know if it has something to do with like his ears or if he can't hear very well, because I do find that we have to like yell his name very loudly. And so I feel like this could be affecting his speaking. So at the time, what he did was he said, oh, yeah, it's the cold season. He does have some fluid in his ears. So in the summertime, it'll probably just dry up. So not to worry about it. I was like, okay. Didn't give me an antibiotic. He was like, it's just going to dry up. I was like, okay. So we went through the summertime. And I still feel like he was kind of having this issue. So because I went to the ENT, he was like, okay, we'll go to the speech therapist. And what they do is they have him take this test. And based on the level, the amount of points that he gets is going to determine whether he can have speech therapy through insurance or not. So Liam was off by 1 point. Just 1 point to allow him to get speech through our doctor, or insurance, I should say. So they wouldn't allow it. I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. So what I did was I went through, what did I do? I went through like a, I guess it's like a governmental program, or it could be our state. One of the two. It's basically is called Harbor Regional. And it was where you could basically get funding for speech therapy through the state. And so they approved him. They did like an online assessment, like a virtual assessment. And they were like, oh yeah, he's definitely struggling with communicating and his words. He's trying to communicate. I could tell he wants to, and he's struggling there. I'm like, duh, this is what I've been saying. So they sent me a speech therapist, and she was amazing. One of the first things she said to me, which I found kind of shocking because I had no knowledge in this, was that he wasn't sitting in a seat where he was perfectly at 90 degrees and he had his feet on the floor. I was like, what does that have to do with anything? Well, what ends up happening is their jaw ends up having to overcompensate because they're not in a position that allows them to use their face and their jaw and their tongue and their teeth in the position that it should be. So what they are doing is they're like trying to overcompensate with their body to get the words out. And I was like, that's crazy. So I think Liam had her for about maybe 3 months. And he was already talking so much better. She had noticed that maybe he was having some issues with his tongue a little. So they were working on exercises in that way. And she was really great. They would basically, it was like a play therapy and talking to one another. Just basically understanding things like, they, them, over there. Yeah, like little things like that, like understanding like we, us, one, like a single item, like, I don't know, like directional. I don't know the like proper terms for this, but it was just like understanding like distance, how many things there are, one person versus two people. And then like being able to kind of like have a conversation, all these things. Basically, after 3 months, she was like, he's good. Like he picked it up real quick. And so I was shocked. He just needed that little bit of help. So then after that, he had graduated from like this speech therapy. And then we had switched insurances, thank God. And at that time, I had gone to a new pediatrician that was more of a natural type pediatrician. They did have some Western medicine, but they definitely leaned more on the natural side of things, which I like. And one of the things I had brought up was, he's still doing a lot of mouth breathing. Now, let me explain. Mouth breathing is not good for you at any point in time. It basically reduces oxygen to the brain. You need oxygen to the brain in order for it to work correctly, and to optimize, how you think and how you process things. Also, it does a number on your heart. Your heart has to work really hard for you when you are breathing through your mouth. And your nose is a filtration system. So as long as you're breathing through your nose, you're filtering out stuff that shouldn't be going directly into your mouth, which is why sometimes people that do like mouth breathing, they could have, they get like sore throats and stuff like that. Or snoring. Snoring actually usually is also like a lazy tongue situation, but we'll get there. So me doing all this research, I'm like, no, this isn't going to be good for him, because especially at the time my son was, I think he was 3. He was talking and everything really well, but at that point developmentally, what they have determined is that if you aren't getting a proper amount of oxygen to the brain, your brain isn't developing as fast as it should be. And at that age, they're learning so much and their brain is like growing so quickly that they need that oxygen. And this is what happens, is that they end up diagnosing kids with ADHD because they're not getting enough oxygen to the brain, and it develops like this form of anxiety. And so it's not basically crossing paths quick enough, and they develop this kind of anxiety that looks like an ADHD problem. So it's basically the blocking of the airway. So this is all my research, and I'm like, hell no, not my kid. So I took him to the ENT, and I was like, yeah, I'm here because of his mouth breathing. And so what they did is they immediately, she took a look in his ears, and she looks at me and goes, oh my God. I'm like, what? And she's like, he talks so well. I'm like, oh yeah, I know. We did some speech therapy to help him with that. She's like, no. I'm shocked because he has fluid in his ears right now, and he's actually reading our lips. What? So basically, going back to the beginning, my son was having trouble speaking and hearing his name because he had fluid in his ears. Not only did he have fluid in his ears, and the reason this was happening was because he was having blockage in his ears, and then he also had enlarged adenoids, which are, towards the top of the nose, which meaning he's not draining through fluid through his ears or through his nose. It's just getting trapped in his face, essentially. And so he was hearing like he was underwater. So the speech therapy helped him speak more, but it still wasn't coming in like ultra clear to him. So he just learned to kind of like read lips. My boy, brilliant. But also I felt so bad because I had been trying so hard for this and thought I was doing all the right things, and he was still suffering. So she immediately was like, yeah, she did an x-ray. That was the other thing with Kaiser, is Kaiser, for some reason, refused to do an x-ray because they were saying at his age, exposing him to that kind of radiation would be really bad for him. And I'm like, okay, well, you guys should have fucking done it, because she did it in 2 minutes. And she was like, yeah, his adenoids are huge and he needs to get tubes in his ears. Tubes in his ears, tubes are very, very common. I have 2 of my best friends are teachers, and they would tell me that there was a significance in the way these children would hear and speak after having tubes done. And they would even recommend it to parents. So we decided to have this surgery. So he had his tubes put in and he had adenoids put in, or not put in, shrunken down. Now, eventually they could grow into their adenoids, but because he was having so many issues, I was like, no, let's just shrink him down and let his face like breathe. So he did great with the surgery, but coming out of the surgery, he had what's called delirium. Now, when you have anesthesia, what I've heard is that when you go into anesthesia, I really struggle with that word, as you can tell. But anyway, when you go into it, based on the state that you're in when you go into it is going to be the same state when you come out of it. So when my son was coming out of the anesthesia, he had what's called delirium, where he gets stuck in between like basically being awake and being asleep. It was horrific for me as a mother. I went to the recovery room to sit with him, and he was fighting me like Hulk. This is like, at this time he was like 2.5 years old. And he was so strong. He was trying to rip his IV out. He was throwing his head all over the place. He was crying. And not once did he open his eyes. It was just like, what's going on? And I started crying, trying to hold him down. And essentially what they had to do is sedate him again because they couldn't control what was going on. So he fell back to sleep. And so we ended up being in the hospital for about 4 hours. Eventually, once he woke up, he was fine. We got him home. And he was like a champion. He was a little sensitive for a couple days, which again, that's known for what happens to kids who go under anesthesia. 2 days after getting this surgery, his enunciation got incredible. So not only was he like speaking really well and he was like reading lips, well, now he could hear clearly, and just the way he would say his words were so much more clear. After that, he would get colds and we didn't need antibiotics. Why? Because he was draining properly. So, and the reason why I'm saying all this is because I'm hoping that whoever parents are listening to this, if this stuff is starting to click, advocate and push. So after that, I was like, we're good. But he was still mouth breathing. I know. It might seem crazy. I'm still worried about this mouth breathing situation. But listen, my husband, he snores. He also has he used to have a lot of bloody noses. This is another thing. My son has incredibly heavy bloody noses. And it come to find, he has enlarged blood vessels in his nose. So anytime if he picked his nose or if it got bumped a little, it would be like gushing blood. So I was like, you know what? Anything that's going on with this kid's face, I'm going to do something about it. So I go to the ENT and I'm like, hey, everything's doing really great. But I remember I originally came to you because of the mouth breathing. And now it doesn't look like it really has anything to do with the nose and the ears. What do you think the problem could be? And they had suggested, you know what? I think you should go see a myofunctional therapist. Myofunctional, it basically works on the mouth and airways. So I went to a myofunctional therapist and she said, I can see he's struggling. I'm not sure why. I think he might have a tongue tie. I was like, huh. She recommended me to go see a dentist who does these airway examinations. So we went and did that. While we were there, she was in his mouth for like 3 minutes and she was like, oh yeah, he's got a 3 tongue tie and a lip tie. No wonder. So he doesn't have full mobility with his lips or his tongue. Still, I think my son is incredible because even with these limitations, he makes sense, he can enunciate, and he's advanced academically. And he's 3 years old. So I'm like, okay, what do we got to do? So we go back to the myofunctional therapist. We do about 6 sessions and come to find out that in order for him to have the surgery for the lip and the tongue tie, he has to have it's like a physical therapy with the myofunctional therapist. What they do is they basically start to train these muscles to work in the way that they're supposed to. Because when they clip these things and all of a sudden their tongue and their lip is working right, they need to know how to use those muscles. So they kind of have you do like a physical therapy with your mouth before the surgery, and then they have you go back to the myofunctional after the surgery. So my insurance would cover this procedure. However, they wouldn't cover the myofunctional. Okay, it's about $175 for 30 minutes of this therapy. I was like, hell no. If you're going to cover for a procedure that he cannot have without myofunctional therapy, you got another one coming. So I fought for it for about 2 months. Thank God I had a sweet and darling myofunctional therapist who was helping me with this and advocating for. I had to show proof that the dentist said he needed it. I had to show proof of the surgeries he already had with the ENT doctor. I had to get a letter from the myofunctional therapist and why she feels he needs this. So long story longer, this is going to be long. They finally approved it, but they said he can only do it for 6 months. So with the myofunctional therapist, our goal was to get him like halfway through and hopefully feel like she could approve for the surgery, and then he'd have it done. And then in the remaining months that we had, we'd be able to finish off the therapy. So we had everything set up to get this done. He started doing his exercises. We were going weekly. He was getting better. And she was like, yes, he's ready. Let's do it. Now, here's the thing. Her friend, who was the dentist that did the examination and found the tongue tie and the lip tie and all that, she was going to be the one that was going to do the procedure. So I went back to the ENT doctor because we were actually seeing them often because Liam was getting bloody noses so much that he actually would have to get his nose cauterized on the inside so it wouldn't happen as much. He started going to TK and he was getting bloody noses like every week. And these teachers were like, what the fuck is happening? Like, this is a lot of blood and it's kind of scary. So while I was with the ENT, I was like, hey, he's going to get this lip and tongue tie surgery. And she was like, well, wait, why don't we just do the lip and tongue tie? And I was like, you guys do that? And she was like, yeah. Now, I instantly thought back to my son having delirium. That every time, I was scared that every time he was going to go into anesthesia, that he was going to come out with this delirium. So the thought of putting him under anesthesia multiple times, because she was telling me that with the bloody noses, because his blood vessels just kept happening, they were thinking about putting him to sleep so they could really cauterize it and they could take his tubes out of his ears because they were already coming out. So she suggested, why don't we just, use the anesthesia one time and do everything? And I thought, yeah, that's the better option. Let's do that. So we decided we were going to do that. We were going to have his tubes taken out of his ears. We were going to cauterize the inside of his nose. We were going to do a lip release and a tongue tie release. And then she wanted to do blood work to see like his red and white blood count to see how they were affecting like his bloody noses. So that was decided. Now you can imagine this is right before going on winter break in TK. All these kids were getting sick, and they specifically said, if he is sick, we will not do the surgery. And I'm in a time crunch. I'm like, no. He has to get this done so he can do at least a little bit of the physical therapy after the surgery. So they give you this whole thing about taking your kid out of school because basically, essentially what happens, and I understand this, especially for the teachers in the schools, that when you take your kid out of school, the school does not receive funding, which is why they need a proper reason for when you take the kid out of school. But for me, that week before going on winter break, he started to get a little sniffly, and there had been 11 kids that week that had been out because they were sick. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm pulling him. So I pulled him out of school like 2-3 days before his surgery. So luckily he still had a little bit of sniffle, but they were like, you know what? I think for the most part, he's over it. We'll do this. And I was like, no, I need to talk to the anesthesiologist about his delirium. So what I had heard was that sometimes they do basically like a couple ways in the way that they give them the anesthesia. Like sometimes it's like they do like the air mask first and then the anesthesia, or vice versa. And for some, and I thought that for some reason that might affect the odds of him having the delirium. And the doctor told me, you know what? We could try, but there's really nothing we can do. It depends on the kid. Most of the time when it's very rare, but most I find that the delirium happens to the kids who are emotionally more aware and maybe a little sensitive. My kid to a T. He's probably an HSP, highly sensitive person. He probably gets that from me. And I love this about him. But I was nervous. So he does the surgery. Everything went well. But he had the delirium really bad. Again, sucks so bad. It is so hard to see your child in that state. They had to sedate him again. So we went from the first time being in the hospital for 4 hours, which we probably should have only been there for like a couple maybe, to being there for 7 hours. That's how hard they had to sedate him. And in that moment, I was so happy that not like happy, but glad that I decided to do this one time and not with 2 separate doctors. So again, I'm telling you this in case you end up with a child like this, to really consider what happens when you put them under anesthesia. I thought it would be different, but I think it's just prone to whoever prone to your child. When we got him home, this was the cutest thing. Okay, so Liam was really, we had decided that Liam was going to work towards an award doing all this myofunctional therapy, because it was every week. It was a lot. I had to do it at home. And he wanted to work towards, he loves trains. He wanted to work towards an electric battery operated train with a remote. So we get home. He only needed like 5 more stickers. I get him on the couch, and first thing he says is, Mom, can I have my last 5 stickers? Now, little did he know I already had this train. And I was like, yeah, buddy. And so he put all of his stickers on his little chart. And then shortly after that, he comes running into the kitchen, and he's crying. And he's looking in all my drawers. I'm like, what are you doing, baby? He's like, I need a bowl. And I'm going to throw up. This is a 4-year-old trying to find a bowl for himself to throw up in. So this also can sometimes happen after anesthesia. Now, this was new. This didn't happen last time. And they also had said that after the lip and the tongue tie surgery that he might not want to eat a lot of food. Not my kid. He was eating chips. He was willing to eat anything. And he just threw it all up. And then it happened twice. But then after that, it was like nothing had happened to this kid. Gave him the red train. He was so excited. He said, I never thought I would have a train like this. Thank you so much. I love him so much. He's so deserving. And then I would say maybe about 3 days after that, just really sensitive. And this just kind of happens. That anesthesia just kind of stays in the body. It just kind of lingers. He didn't have the nausea or anything anymore, but it was just harder on making decisions and just a lot more crying, just really sensitive. So know that even though, after a day of surgery or whatever, that stuff can linger, especially considering how many that my son had to get sedated like twice, right? So after that, he has to go back to the myofunctional therapist, and he also has to do exercises after that. This is because the mouth heals so quickly that the tongue and the lip could actually go back together. I was terrified. I had worked so hard to get to where we were that I was like, oh my God, like, what if I don't do the exercises right? Like, what if I don't, catch it in time? What is it going to look like? Luckily, this kid, amazing flying colors, went back to the myofunctional therapist. He's healed. He's wonderful. And already, just with that little bit, he's not snoring. And he wasn't really actually snoring that much, but he's sleeping with his mouth closed a lot more. And even just, and this is the other crazy part, having a meal. I don't know about your kid, but my kid had the hardest time sitting down and just eating a freaking meal without getting up 355 times or just wiggling this and that. Now, remember all the way back when I had said how the body will overcompensate for what the mouth isn't doing. They're trying to, it is so weird, but they need their whole body to get a meal down. He was sitting more at dinner. Here's the thing. We had a love-hate relationship with dinner time. Dinner time was important. It was the time that we all sat at the table and did dinner. But we hated it too. Because it was like, Liam, don't touch that. Liam, sit down. Liam, no, you can't go over there. No, take another bite of food. It was just like, it was draining. So that's why we noticed it right away when he was just sitting there, eating, talking, having... Now, I don't know how 4-year-olds are supposed to act. I just know that mine was different. So he is now healing. He's finishing up his therapy. He should be done in about a month. And yeah, I'm really proud of him. This has been a really long journey. My myofunctional therapist told me that she has never had a mother fight as hard as I did for the therapy. They usually give up. Even his surgeon, after she came out to tell me he did have some delirium, he's super strong. I was like, thank you. And I asked her, so what kind of exercises should she be doing? And she was like, oh, well, just left to right. And I was like, well, what about myofunctional? And she's like, most people can't afford that unless they really, really fight for it. And I was like, oh, well, I did. And she was like, wow, okay. Now, yes, I'm tooting my own horn a little bit because I'm really proud of myself, but also realizing like, damn, my kid showed so many signs that he needed this. I can't believe how hard I had to push for years to get him to where he is now at like I said, a very important time in his life. At this age, he needed to be able to have this done to really help him developmentally. Like, it would have made a big difference, especially like I was saying with the ADHD. These kids are diagnosed with the ADHD all the time. But like, what if they haven't done these things? Or what if they didn't even know that these things will affect something like that? So that's why I really wanted to do this episode. Because like I said, this is fine, right? And it wasn't. The mouth breathing wasn't fine. him having struggling with speech wasn't fine. I knew he couldn't hear right. And an intuition, especially like a mother's intuition, do not ignore that gift. It's the only gift that we have that nobody else does when it comes to our children. Like, I'm not going to know your children like I know mine. It's not just, I just have this intuition because I have a kid. No, I just have this intuition specifically with my child who grew in my belly. And do not take that lightly. And don't let others pretend like it ain't there. So that's my story on that one. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope that this helps anybody that might be struggling in this area or wondering if this is right, if this is wrong. Should I push harder? Should I not? Now you know my opinion and what you think. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now. Alrighty, thanks for hanging out with me. If today's episode made you laugh, cry, or feel a little less alone in your messy situation, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. And if you're ready for deeper support, learning how to interpret what your body is communicating and integrate change without reinventing yourself, you can find me on Instagram at Courtney with an IE or my website, CourtneyVitality.com. Until next time, I know you are doing your best.